In 1798, the Mediterranean was a chessboard of European power struggles, with the British and French empires locked in a contest for dominance. Napoleon Bonaparte, seeking to disrupt British access to its eastern colonies and to assert French influence, embarked on the Egyptian campaign. His ambitions were twofold: to weaken Britain's naval and trade supremacy, and to establish a scientific and cultural foothold in Egypt. In May 1798, a formidable French fleet set sail for Egypt, marking the beginning of an audacious military and scientific expedition. This move, however, would soon draw the attention of the British Royal Navy, setting the stage for a naval confrontation that would have far-reaching consequences for both Napoleon's campaign and European geopolitics. The Battle of the Nile, also known as the Battle of Abu Qir Bay, on the evening of August 1, 1798, under the cover of darkness, saw Admiral Horatio Nelson leading the British Royal Navy into a daring confrontation at Abu Qir Bay, where the French fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral François-Paul Bruys de Gallier, was anchored in a seemingly formidable defensive position. Nelson, employing a bold and unconventional strategy, ordered his ships to sail between the French fleet and the shore, effectively trapping the French and attacking from both sides. The battle was marked by intense and close-quarters combat, with the British leveraging their superior seamanship and tactical innovation. The French fleet suffered devastating losses, including the destruction of its flagship, L'Orient, which spectacularly exploded during the battle. By the end of the engagement, the British had achieved a decisive victory, capturing or destroying most of the French ships, and significantly diminishing Napoleon's naval capabilities in the Mediterranean. The aftermath of the Battle of the Nile was a dire turning point for Napoleon and his ambitions in Egypt. With the French fleet decimated, Napoleon's forces found themselves effectively marooned, cut off from France, and unable to receive reinforcements or supplies. The British blockade of the Mediterranean not only thwarted Napoleon's logistical support, but also signaled to European powers and local forces in Egypt and the Middle East that the French were vulnerable. Despite the setback, Napoleon attempted to maintain control over Egypt, pressing on with military campaigns against Ottoman and Mamluk forces and continuing the scientific and archaeological work initiated upon their arrival. However, the isolation imposed by British naval superiority and the growing resistance from local and external forces put increasing strain on the French troops, leading to hardships and diminishing morale. The loss at the Battle of the Nile had far-reaching consequences, not only undermining the strategic objectives of the Egyptian campaign, but also altering the course of the broader conflict between Britain and France. Napoleon's inability to secure a decisive victory in Egypt and establish a lasting French presence in the region marked the beginning of the end of his ambitions in the East. The Battle of the Nile reverberated far beyond the shores of Egypt, sending shockwaves through the political landscape of Europe. The British victory was celebrated as a triumph over French ambitions, bolstering British naval supremacy and altering the dynamics of the ongoing struggle against Napoleon's France. The defeat significantly weakened France's position in the Mediterranean, prompting European powers, including Austria and Russia, to renew their opposition to French expansionism, leading to the formation of new coalitions against France. For Napoleon, the defeat marked a critical juncture in his career. Despite the setback, he returned to France in 1799, his reputation as a military genius intact, largely due to his adept handling of the news and his subsequent propaganda efforts. The failure of the Egyptian campaign did not diminish his political ambitions. Instead, it catalyzed his resolve to seize control of the French government, culminating in the coup of 18 Brumaire later that year. This pivotal moment in French history propelled Napoleon to power as first consul, setting the stage for his eventual declaration as Emperor of the French in 1804. In the early 19th century, Europe was a theater of relentless conflict, with the Napoleonic Wars reshaping the continent's political and military landscape. At the heart of these conflicts was the bitter rivalry between France and Britain, two superpowers vying for dominance. Unable to secure a decisive military victory over the formidable Royal Navy, Napoleon Bonaparte, in a bold move, turned to economic warfare as a means to undermine Britain's strength. In 1806, he issued the Berlin Decree, initiating the Continental System, an economic blockade designed to close European ports to British goods. Napoleon's goal was clear: to cripple Britain's economy by cutting off its access to continental markets, thereby forcing London to sue for peace on French terms. This strategic gambit marked the beginning of an extensive economic war that would have far-reaching consequences for Europe and beyond. Following the Berlin Decree of 1806, and later reinforced by the Milan Decree of 1807, Napoleon sought to enforce the Continental System across Europe, from the Iberian Peninsula to the Russian borders. The blockade aimed to sever trade ties with Britain, compelling European nations under French influence to close their ports to British ships and goods. The enforcement of such a widespread embargo, however, proved to be fraught with difficulties. Smuggling became rampant as European merchants sought to circumvent the blockade, driven by the high demand for British manufactured goods and colonial imports. The reactions across Europe were mixed and often resistant. While some of Napoleon's allies complied with the decrees, others, like Russia, only nominally enforced the blockade, reluctant to damage their own economies. The system's rigidity and the resultant economic strain led to growing discontent within the French Empire and among its supposed allies, laying the groundwork for tensions that would later escalate. The blockade's impact was profound, leading to economic disruptions across the continent. While it did inflict damage on the British economy, the resilience of British trade networks and the Royal Navy's dominance allowed Britain to seek alternative markets and maintain a considerable level of trade despite the embargo. As the Continental System stretched on, its economic toll began to manifest more acutely across France and its allied territories. The embargo, while designed to cripple Britain, had a boomerang effect, severely disrupting continental economies that had long relied on British trade. Industrial regions in France and the Low Countries faced declining output due to shortages of raw materials and markets for their goods. Agricultural sectors also suffered, as the blockade prevented the export of surplus produce, leading to falling prices and mounting losses for farmers. The economic strain was not confined to France. It rippled across Europe, straining relations with allied and subjugated states forced to comply with the blockade. In regions like Spain and Italy, the enforcement of the embargo exacerbated local grievances, fueling resistance against French rule and contributing to the spread of nationalist sentiments. Moreover, the widespread smuggling that arose as a means to circumvent the blockade undermined the system's effectiveness and eroded respect for French authority. The British, adapting to the challenge, expanded their trade with the Americas and other parts of the world, mitigating the impact of the Continental System on their economy. The growing economic hardship and discontent within the French Empire and among its allies highlighted the limitations of economic warfare as a tool for achieving geopolitical dominance. The Continental System, ambitious in scope and intent, ultimately contributed to weakening Napoleon's grasp on Europe, setting the stage for the coalition that would rise against him. The Continental System, one of Napoleon's most audacious strategies, played a pivotal role in the complex web of factors leading to his downfall. The widespread economic distress it caused, coupled with the erosion of support among France's allies, fueled resistance across Europe. By 1814, as coalition forces marched into Paris, Napoleon's reign approached its end, leading to his abdication and exile to Elba. The failure of the Continental System highlighted the limitations of economic blockade as a means to secure lasting geopolitical dominance. The Congress of Vienna in 1815, convened in the aftermath of Napoleon's defeat, sought not only to restore political order, but also to address the economic disarray caused by years of warfare and trade restrictions. The lessons of the Continental System influenced the Congress's deliberations, leading to a renewed emphasis on the importance of free trade and the establishment of a balance of power designed to prevent future conflicts. The legacy of the Continental System extended beyond the immediate economic turmoil it caused. It spurred changes in European trade policies, encouraging nations to seek more resilient and diversified economies. It also underscored the interconnectedness of global trade networks, a lesson that resonates in the complexities of today's international trade environment. At the dawn of the 19th century, the world stage was dominated by the strategic maneuvers of European powers, with France under Napoleon Bonaparte seeking to expand its influence both on the continent and across the Atlantic. Initially, Napoleon envisioned Louisiana as the cornerstone of a renewed French empire in North America, serving both as a source of wealth and as a buffer against British expansion. However, the realities of maintaining and defending this vast and distant territory, coupled with the pressing needs of his ambitions in Europe, led to a dramatic reassessment. The failure to suppress a slave rebellion in Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti, and the looming threat of war with Britain, which would challenge French control of the seas, compelled Napoleon to reconsider his American holdings. In a strategic pivot, he decided to offer Louisiana to the United States, a move that would have profound implications for the young American Republic and the balance of power in the New World. In early 1803, the United States, under President Thomas Jefferson, sent James Monroe to join Robert Livingston in Paris with the initial intent of securing New Orleans and access to the Mississippi River for American trade. However, the American envoys were soon presented with an offer that went far beyond their original mandate: the purchase of the entire Louisiana territory. Napoleon, facing renewed conflict with Britain and recognizing the logistical challenges of maintaining an overseas empire, decided to sell the vast territory, aiming to bolster France's finances for his European campaigns. The negotiations were swift but fraught with tension as the Americans grappled with the unexpected scope of the offer and the implications for the young republic. The price was settled at $15 million, or approximately 4 cents an acre, for the 828,000 square miles of territory, doubling the size of the United States overnight. The Louisiana Purchase Agreement, signed on April 30, 1803, showcased the practical negotiating strategies of that era and was a bold move that would significantly change the direction of American history. The Louisiana Purchase instantly transformed the United States into a continental power, igniting a fervor for exploration and settlement in the vast uncharted territories west of the Mississippi River. President Thomas Jefferson, recognizing the need to understand the geography, resources, and peoples of this immense acquisition, commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1804. Their journey of discovery, lasting until 1806, provided invaluable knowledge of the western lands and laid the groundwork for future expansion. However, the expansion came at a significant cost to the native tribes who inhabited these lands for centuries. The purchase marked the beginning of a series of treaties, conflicts, and forced relocations that would profoundly alter the lives of indigenous peoples. The drive westward, fueled by the ideal of manifest destiny in the coming decades, led to the displacement of countless native communities, forever changing the demographic and cultural landscape of North America. The Louisiana Purchase, while a milestone in American territorial expansion, thus also heralded a period of profound and often tragic transformation for the continent's original inhabitants, setting the stage for the complex mosaic of challenges and opportunities that would define the American West. The Louisiana Purchase had profound implications that rippled across the globe, influencing the colonial and diplomatic strategies of the world's powers. For France, the sale marked a strategic retreat from its North American ambitions as Napoleon Bonaparte redirected his focus to expanding French influence in Europe and beyond. The funds acquired from the sale bolstered France's military coffers, funding campaigns that would reshape the European continent for years to come. For Britain, the deal underscored the growing challenge posed by the United States, which was rapidly emerging as a significant power with territorial ambitions of its own. The British response was a mix of diplomatic engagement and strategic positioning, as they sought to protect their remaining North American colonies and maintain their dominance of the seas. Globally, the Louisiana Purchase signaled the advent of the United States as a player in international politics, setting the stage for future American expansionism and its complex interplay with European colonial powers. The deal also highlighted the fluid nature of territorial claims and the importance of diplomacy in shaping the world map, themes that would continue to dominate international relations throughout the 19th century and beyond. By the turn of the 19th century, Europe was deeply scarred by the relentless conflicts of the Napoleonic Wars. The continent, weary from years of military campaigns, economic blockades, and political upheavals, was ripe for peace. Both France, under the leadership of First Consul Napoleon Bonaparte, and Britain alongside its allies, recognized the mutual benefits of a temporary halt to hostilities. The complex web of European politics, the economic strain of continuous warfare, and the internal pressures facing both governments set the stage for negotiations. In this atmosphere of cautious optimism and strategic calculation, the Treaty of Amiens emerged as a beacon of hope, promising a respite from the turmoil and a chance for diplomatic resolution. In late 1801, after preliminary discussions and a series of complex diplomatic maneuvers, formal negotiations began in Amiens, France. The French delegation, led by Joseph Bonaparte, brother of Napoleon, and the British envoy Lord Cornwallis, a seasoned diplomat and soldier, spearheaded the talks. The negotiations were fraught with challenges, as both sides sought concessions that would affirm their military and political gains, yet demonstrate a willingness to compromise for peace. The Treaty of Amiens, signed on March 25, 1802, was heralded as a diplomatic breakthrough with several key terms. France agreed to withdraw from several occupied territories, including Naples and the Roman Republic, while retaining control over others, such as the Dutch Republic and the Swiss Confederation. Britain was to return captured French colonies, but was allowed to keep Sri Lanka, Ceylon, and Trinidad. The independence of the Ionian Islands was recognized, and Malta, a contentious issue throughout the negotiations, was to be returned to the Knights of St. John under a neutral administration. This treaty marked the first definitive pause in the hostilities that had engulfed Europe, offering a momentary vision of a peaceful continent. The Treaty of Amiens brought a welcome respite to a continent ravaged by years of warfare. Across Europe, the cessation of hostilities allowed for a brief period of economic recovery and a return to civilian life. The treaty was initially met with relief and cautious optimism, as people hoped for a lasting peace. In Britain, the public celebrated the end of the blockade, which had restricted trade and contributed to economic hardship. In France, Napoleon used the peace to consolidate his power, undertaking reforms and bolstering his domestic position. Yet despite these positive developments, the peace established by the Treaty of Amiens was built on shaky foundations. Key issues remained unresolved, including the status of territories not explicitly covered by the treaty, the future of naval power and colonial ambitions, and the deep-seated mistrust between Britain and France. These lingering disputes, coupled with the ambitions of Napoleon and the British determination to check French influence, meant that the treaty was viewed by many as merely a pause in hostilities rather than a lasting resolution. The peace established by the Treaty of Amiens began to fray almost as soon as it was signed. Several factors contributed to its unraveling, leading Europe back to the path of war. Chief among these was the mutual distrust between Britain and France, exacerbated by Napoleon's continued expansionist policies. Despite the treaty, Napoleon sought to strengthen French influence in Italy and Germany, alarming British officials who viewed these actions as direct violations of the peace agreement. Moreover, the issue of Malta, a strategic island in the Mediterranean, became a focal point of contention. Britain's reluctance to evacuate Malta, as stipulated in the treaty, due to concerns over Napoleon's intentions in the Mediterranean, served as a significant breach of trust. Additionally, the British press's critical coverage of Napoleon and French affairs fueled further animosity between the two nations. By May 1803, diplomatic relations had deteriorated to the point of no return, and Britain declared war on France, marking the end of the Treaty of Amiens and the commencement of the Napoleonic War's most intensive phase. This renewed conflict would engulf Europe for over a decade, reshaping the continent's political landscape and confirming the impossibility of a lasting peace between the era's great powers under the existing conditions. In the early years of the 19th century, Europe was a continent in turmoil, reshaped by the ambitious conquests of Napoleon Bonaparte. The Peace of Amiens had collapsed, and Britain, long wary of French dominance, sought to curtail Napoleon's expansionist agenda. By 1805, the geopolitical landscape was ripe for a new alliance against France. The Third Coalition, an alliance comprising Britain, Austria, Russia, and Sweden, was formed with the singular aim of defeating Napoleon and restoring balance to Europe. The coalition reflected the growing concern among Europe's monarchies over the threat posed by Napoleon, not just to their territories, but to the very foundation of the old European order. This alliance set the stage for a series of dramatic military confrontations that would decide the fate of the continent. The formation of the Third Coalition in 1805 was a feat of diplomatic agility and shared apprehension. Spearheaded by Britain, particularly through the efforts of Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, substantial subsidies were offered to persuade other European powers to join the anti-French alliance. Tsar Alexander Theodosius of Russia, motivated by a mix of ideological opposition to Napoleon's rule and strategic interests in the Balkans and the Mediterranean, emerged as a key ally. Emperor Francis II of Austria, having suffered previous defeats at the hands of Napoleon, was eager for retribution and the restoration of Austrian influence in Italy and Germany. Sweden, under King Gustav IV Adolf, joined, driven by concerns over French control of the Baltic Sea and the security of Swedish territories. The negotiation process was fraught with challenges, as each member of the coalition had its own interests and reservations. However, the shared goal of containing Napoleon's expansion and the collective fear of his dominance in Europe overcame these hurdles, leading to a formalized alliance. The Third Coalition was not just a military pact, but a declaration of a united front against the perceived tyranny and revolutionary fervor embodied by Napoleon and his empire. In the lead-up to 1805, Europe was a continent on the edge, with the powers of the Third Coalition, Britain, Russia, Austria and Sweden, aligning against France. Napoleon Bonaparte, aware of the looming threat, prepared to defend his empire against this formidable alliance. The strategic situation was complex, with the French forces spread thin across Europe. Yet Napoleon's genius lay in his ability to manipulate both military and psychological warfare to his advantage. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only test the mettle of the French army, but also define Napoleon's legacy as one of history's greatest military commanders. The Battle of Austerlitz, also known as the Battle of the Three Emperors, was poised to become a clash for the ages, a culmination of Napoleonic warfare that would decisively shape the future of Europe. In the cold days of November 1805, as the armies of the Third Coalition converged on the strategically vital plains near Austerlitz, Napoleon Bonaparte orchestrated a campaign of misinformation designed to lure his adversaries into a false sense of superiority. By feigning weakness and retreating in key areas, Napoleon convinced the coalition commanders, Tsar Alexander Bonaparte of Russia and Holy Roman Emperor Francis II of Austria, that the French forces were overextended and ripe for defeat. Napoleon's ruse was calculated and bold, exploiting the overconfidence and disparate strategies of the allied Russian and Austrian forces. He anticipated that the coalition would attempt to cut off the French line of retreat to Vienna, thereby stretching their lines thin and exposing their flanks to a counterattack. This strategic deception set the stage for the Battle of Austerlitz, with the French army positioned to capitalize on the terrain and the anticipated movements of their foes. On the cold morning of December 2nd, 1805, the Battle of Austerlitz, also known as the Battle of the Three Emperors, commenced under the auspicious sun of Austerlitz. Napoleon had successfully baited the coalition forces into a precarious position, believing they were on the verge of encircling and defeating the French army. As the allied Russian and Austrian troops advanced, Napoleon ordered a calculated withdrawal of his right flank, further enticing the enemy into the trap. At the critical moment, with the coalition forces overextended, Napoleon unleashed his reserves in a powerful counterattack against the vulnerable flanks of the Allied army. The French forces, executing their maneuvers with precision and speed, broke through the enemy lines, turning the tide of the battle decisively in their favor. The coalition army, caught off guard and unable to withstand the ferocity of the French assault, crumbled under the pressure. The victory at Austerlitz was not just evidence of Napoleon's strategic foresight and mastery of warfare, but also a devastating blow to the Third Coalition, showcasing the French army's prowess and solidifying Napoleon's legacy as one of history's greatest military commanders. The Battle of Austerlitz not only marked Napoleon's greatest military victory, but also significantly altered the course of European history. In the immediate aftermath, the Treaty of Pressburg, signed on December 26, 1805, formalized the disintegration of the Third Coalition. Austria, suffering considerable territorial losses, ceded lands to Napoleon's allies and agreed to pay substantial indemnities, further weakening its position in Europe. The treaty expanded the French Empire, solidifying Napoleon's control over Italy and Germany, and paving the way for the creation of the Confederation of the Rhine, a federation of German states under French influence. The victory at Austerlitz and the subsequent treaty dramatically shifted the balance of power in Europe. Napoleon emerged as the continent's paramount leader, with his authority and the spread of Napoleonic reforms reshaping European governance, law, and society. However, the peace established by the Treaty of Pressburg was tenuous, with Britain remaining steadfast in its opposition to Napoleon. The battle's outcome also sowed the seeds of future conflicts, as nationalism and resistance to French domination began to stir in the occupied territories. The legacy of Austerlitz and its aftermath extended far beyond the immediate geopolitical shifts. It exemplified the peak of Napoleon's power and the effectiveness of his military strategies, influencing generations of military thinkers and leaders. Yet, it also highlighted the limitations of military conquest in achieving lasting peace, presaging the turbulent years that lay ahead for Napoleon and Europe. In 1807, Europe was a chessboard of power, with Napoleon Bonaparte seeking to extend his dominion and enforce the Continental System against Britain by closing European ports to British trade. Spain, allied with France since 1796, became a target of Napoleon's ambitions not only as a means to pressure Portugal, Britain's steadfast ally, but also to secure the southwestern flank of his empire. The Treaty of Fontainebleau, signed in October 1807, allowed French troops passage through Spain to invade Portugal, setting the stage for a broader conflict. However, Napoleon's intentions soon became apparent as French forces occupied strategic fortresses in Spain, undermining Spanish sovereignty and igniting a crisis that would escalate into widespread rebellion. The Peninsular War, erupting in 1808, quickly spiraled into a quagmire for Napoleon's forces. The brutal suppression of the Madrid uprising on May 2nd served only to inflame Spanish resistance, sparking a nationwide rebellion against French rule. The Spanish and Portuguese peoples, rallying around their beleaguered monarchies and the Catholic Church, organized into guerrilla units, waging a relentless campaign against the invaders. This unconventional warfare, characterized by hit-and-run tactics and local knowledge, severely hampered the French army's mobility and strained their supply lines. Simultaneously, the British saw an opportunity to weaken Napoleon's grip on Europe. In August 1808, a British expeditionary force under Sir Arthur Wellesley, later known as the Duke of Wellington, landed in Portugal, quickly proving their mettle at the battles of Roliça and Vimeiro. The British intervention marked a significant turning point, providing a regular army that, in conjunction with the guerrilla fighters, posed a formidable challenge to French ambitions in the Iberian Peninsula. The Peninsular War, from 1808 to 1814, was marked by a series of strategic battles and sieges that underscored the complexity of the conflict. The sieges of Zaragoza epitomized the fierce Spanish resistance, with the city's defenders enduring brutal assaults and hardships. Meanwhile, the Battle of Talavera in 1809 showcased the effective cooperation between British and Spanish forces, although victory came with heavy losses. One of the most significant strategic maneuvers was implemented by Sir Arthur Wellesley, who orchestrated the construction of the lines of Torres Vedras, a formidable network of fortifications protecting Lisbon. This masterstroke effectively turned Portugal into a fortress, thwarting French advances and safeguarding the Allied base of operations. Throughout the conflict, the guerrilla warfare waged by Spanish and Portuguese fighters continued to bleed French resources, complementing the conventional battles and sieges. This blend of resistance, both organized and spontaneous, created a quagmire for French forces, undermining Napoleon's hold on the peninsula and diverting critical resources from other fronts. By 1813, Europe was a continent on the brink of a monumental clash. The disastrous Russian campaign of 1812 had severely weakened Napoleon's Grande Armée, offering a glimmer of hope to his adversaries. Seizing the moment, the Sixth Coalition, comprising Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden and Britain among others, was formed with a singular objective: to decisively defeat Napoleon and redraw the map of Europe. The coalition's forces, emboldened by the prospect of a weakened French Empire, began converging on the German heartland, setting their sights on Leipzig for a confrontation that would become known as the Battle of Nations. This alliance, unprecedented in its scale, aimed to bring an end to French authority and restore balance to a war-torn continent. In the days leading up to October 16, 1813, the fields around Leipzig swelled with the ranks of over 500,000 soldiers. The Sixth Coalition, leveraging its numerical superiority, prepared to encircle and engage Napoleon's forces, which numbered around 200,000 men. Napoleon, ever the tactician, sought to utilize the central position of Leipzig to disrupt the coalition's lines of communication and supply, hoping to defeat the Allied armies in detail. The strategic importance of Leipzig was clear to both sides. It was not just a battle for control of a city, but a pivotal point for the future of Europe. As the coalition forces tightened their noose around the city, the French prepared for a defense that would test the limits of their military prowess and Napoleon's strategic genius. The stage was set for a battle of unprecedented scale and significance, with the fate of an empire hanging in the balance. The Battle of Leipzig commenced with intense fighting, as coalition forces launched coordinated attacks on multiple fronts, aiming to encircle and weaken the French positions. The villages of Wachau and Liebertwolkwitz became focal points of the conflict, witnessing brutal engagements as both sides vied for control. Napoleon, recognizing the critical nature of these battles, committed his forces to repel the assaults, managing to hold the line against the overwhelming numbers of the coalition. However, the vastness of the coalition army and the diversity of its forces presented a formidable challenge. The battle's scale and the complexity of the maneuvers required extraordinary coordination among the coalition commanders, who were determined to leverage their numerical advantage. The fighting extended across the battlefield, with neither side able to secure a decisive breakthrough on the first day. As the battle progressed, the commitment of fresh coalition troops and the relentless pressure on French positions began to tilt the balance. The French army, stretched thin and gradually being encircled, fought with desperation, aware that the outcome of this battle would have far-reaching consequences for their empire and Europe. By October 19, 1813, the Battle of Leipzig had reached its climax. The coalition forces, united in their determination to defeat Napoleon, launched a series of decisive assaults that finally penetrated the French defenses. The breakthrough was a culmination of days of intense fighting, strategic maneuvering, and the indomitable spirit of the coalition armies. The capture of key positions by the coalition, combined with the arrival of fresh reinforcements, overwhelmed the French forces, which had been fighting valiantly against insurmountable odds. Faced with the collapse of his lines and the risk of encirclement, Napoleon was forced to order a retreat. The retreat, however, was far from orderly. The destruction of the only bridge over the Elster River in a premature explosion added chaos to the withdrawal, resulting in significant French casualties and the capture of thousands of soldiers. The Battle of Leipzig, thus, marked a decisive defeat for Napoleon and a turning point in the Napoleonic Wars. It represented not only the largest and one of the bloodiest battles of the era, but also a critical blow to Napoleon's aspirations for European dominance. The coalition's victory at Leipzig set the stage for their advance into France and ultimately led to Napoleon's abdication and exile to Elba in the following year. In April 1814, within the walls of the Palace of Fontainebleau, the fate of Napoleon Bonaparte was sealed. The Treaty of Fontainebleau, signed on April 11, 1814, formalized Napoleon's abdication in exchange for sovereignty over the island of Elba, a small Mediterranean island off the coast of Italy. This agreement granted him and his family a pension from France and allowed him to retain the title of emperor, though his domain was vastly diminished. Napoleon's acceptance of the treaty was a poignant acknowledgement of his precipitous fall from power. The once indomitable ruler of much of Europe was now relegated to the governance of a tiny island. Yet in a demonstration of his enduring resolve, Napoleon addressed his loyal soldiers one last time before departing for Elba, expressing a mix of sorrow, pride, and an undiminished spirit. The journey to Elba was a marked departure from the triumphs of his past. As he departed Fontainebleau on April 20, 1814, and made his way through France, the reactions of the French people ranged from sympathetic to hostile, reflecting the complex legacy of his rule. Granted sovereignty over the island as per the Treaty of Fontainebleau, Napoleon applied his considerable energy and intellect to its administration. He initiated reforms to improve agricultural productivity, revamped the legal and educational systems, and even designed new urban projects, aiming to leave a lasting mark on his small domain. Despite these endeavors, the former emperor remained acutely aware of the political developments in France and across Europe. Isolated but not idle, Napoleon received a steady flow of information from the continent, fueling his desire for a return to power. The loyalty of his followers, coupled with the growing discontent with the monarchical rule restoration in France, began to shape his plans for an audacious comeback. Life on Elba was a curious interlude in Napoleon's storied career, a blend of governance, introspection, and plotting. The island under his rule experienced a brief renaissance, showcasing his undiminished capabilities as a leader. However, the call of destiny and the lure of unfinished business in France weighed heavily on his mind. In the early hours of February 26, 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte, with a handful of loyal followers, embarked on a daring escape from the island of Elba. Exploiting the temporary absence of British naval ships patrolling the waters, Napoleon set sail for France, determined to reclaim his throne and restore his vision for the nation. His arrival on the French mainland was met with a swell of support, as soldiers and citizens alike rallied to his banner, disillusioned with the Bourbon monarchy that had been restored in his absence. Napoleon's march towards Paris was a triumphant procession, with each step eroding the authority of King Louis XVIII, who fled upon hearing of Napoleon's approach. On March 20, 1815, Napoleon entered Paris, beginning the period known as the 100 Days. This remarkable return to power was a demonstration of his enduring charisma and the loyalty he commanded among the French people and the army. However, the resurgence of Napoleon on the European stage prompted the swift reconstitution of alliances against him. Within weeks of Napoleon's return to Paris, France was transformed into a hive of military activity. Napoleon, leveraging his unparalleled grasp of warfare and his ability to inspire loyalty, swiftly set about reconstituting his army. Despite the depletion of France's resources from years of continuous conflict, the call to defend the nation under Napoleon's banner resonated deeply with the French people, leading to a surge in enlistment. In March 1815, Europe was thrust back into turmoil as Napoleon Bonaparte returned from exile on Elba, reasserting his control over France in a dramatic period known as the 100 Days. This bold comeback alarmed the powers of Europe gathered at the Congress of Vienna, who were jolted by the news of Napoleon's resurgence. Realizing the threat he posed to the fragile post-Napoleonic peace they sought to establish, the Seventh Coalition, comprising Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, and others, quickly declared Napoleon an outlaw and mobilized their armies. The stage was set for a conflict that would once again engulf the continent, as the coalition aimed to decisively end Napoleon's influence in European affairs. As Napoleon moved his newly reformed army northwards, the coalition forces led by the Duke of Wellington and Prussian Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher maneuvered to confront him. The strategic crossroads of Waterloo, just south of Brussels, became the focal point for this confrontation. Napoleon, commanding an army of about 73,000, sought to deliver a decisive blow to the Allied forces before the Prussians could fully join them. Opposing him, the Duke of Wellington commanded an Allied army of approximately 68,000 troops, comprising British, Dutch, Belgian, and German soldiers, with Prussian forces under Blücher numbering around 50,000, marching to converge on the battlefield. The terrain played a significant role in Wellington's defensive strategy, with his forces positioned behind a ridgeline that offered protection from French artillery and obscured the disposition of his troops. The farms of Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte, fortified and manned by Wellington's forces, were pivotal to his defensive scheme, serving as advanced outposts that would fiercely contest French attacks. As the opposing armies took their positions, the tension on the battlefield was palpable. Both Napoleon and Wellington understood the high stakes of the impending clash, with the future of Europe hanging in the balance. The Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, was not merely a confrontation of two armies, but a clash of strategies, wills, and historical legacies. It became a grueling test of endurance, strategy, and courage. The French launched repeated attacks on the Hougoumont farm, a key to Wellington's right flank, but were met with staunch resistance, turning the farmstead into a deadly contest of attrition. Meanwhile, the center of the battlefield witnessed the critical loss of La Haye-Sainte to French forces, compromising Wellington's defensive line and heightening the battle's intensity. A dramatic counterpoint to the infantry's struggle was the charge of the British heavy cavalry, which initially achieved significant success against the French, but suffered heavy losses in the process. As the day progressed, the arrival of Blücher's Prussian forces on the battlefield added new pressure on Napoleon's right flank, threatening the French army's cohesion. Despite the overwhelming challenges, Wellington's forces held their ground, buoyed by the discipline of the British squares and the timely support of their Prussian allies. Napoleon, in a final bid to turn the tide, committed his elite Imperial Guard to a decisive assault. However, the Guard's repulse signaled the collapse of French morale and the inevitable defeat of Napoleon's army. The Battle of Waterloo concluded with a chaotic retreat of the French forces, marking a decisive end to Napoleon's rule and reshaping the European political landscape. The courage and sacrifice displayed by all involved left a lasting legacy, commemorating Waterloo as a symbol of the end of an era and the dawn of a new age in Europe. In the wake of his defeat, Napoleon was compelled to abdicate for the second time on June 22, 1815, leading to his exile to the remote island of St. Helena, where he would spend the remainder of his days. This marked the definitive end of the Napoleonic Wars, a series of conflicts that had reshaped Europe over 2 decades. The Congress of Vienna, which had been interrupted by Napoleon's return, reconvened with a renewed purpose. The leaders of the major powers sought to establish a lasting peace by redrawing borders and creating a balance of power designed to prevent the rise of a single dominant force. The resulting settlement laid the groundwork for nearly a century of relative stability in Europe, punctuated by the revolutions of 1848 and the unification of Italy and Germany in the latter half of the 19th century. The legacy of Waterloo extends beyond its immediate political consequences. It remains one of the most studied and commemorated battles in military history, symbolizing the climax of the Age of Revolution and the transition to the modern era. Memorials on the battlefield honor the courage and sacrifice of those who fought, while the story of Waterloo continues to captivate historians, strategists, and the public, serving as a reminder of the human cost of war and the enduring quest for peace. In the wake of the Napoleonic Wars, Europe lay in ruins with old dynasties toppled, borders altered, and societies transformed by the ideals of the French Revolution. The need for a comprehensive peace settlement was evident, leading to the convening of the Congress of Vienna in September 1814, extending into June 1815. This diplomatic summit aimed not only to restore the territorial boundaries disrupted by years of conflict, but also to establish a framework for lasting peace and stability across the continent. Representatives from the great powers of Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, along with a host of other European states, gathered in Vienna with the monumental task of redrawing the map of Europe. The Congress sought to balance the aspirations of resurgent monarchies with the realities of a continent profoundly changed by revolutionary and Napoleonic rule. The diplomacy of Vienna was characterized by grand balls and opulent gatherings, yet behind the scenes, it was a battleground of negotiation, persuasion, and compromise. The Congress of Vienna brought together some of the most influential figures of the age, each representing their nation's interests in the post-war order. Prince Clemens von Metternich of Austria, the host and a master of diplomatic strategy, aimed to restore Austria's leading position in Europe and maintain a balance of power that would ensure the continent's stability. Tsar Alexander III of Russia sought to expand Russian influence and secure gains, while also promoting a vision of Christian unity and cooperation. Lord Castlereagh of Britain focused on securing a lasting peace that would safeguard trade and prevent any single power from dominating the continent. Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, representing a defeated France, skillfully navigated the diplomatic waters to restore France's status as a major power and prevent punitive measures that could destabilize Europe. Prince Karl August von Hardenberg of Prussia sought to expand Prussian territories and influence, particularly in Germany. The initial proposals cantered around key principles: the restoration of legitimate monarchies, compensation for territorial losses, and the establishment of a balance of power to prevent future conflicts. These principles, however, would be tested as the Congress navigated the complex web of national interests, territorial disputes, and emerging ideologies. The Congress of Vienna was characterized by a series of negotiations that sought to address the territorial and political upheavals wrought by the Napoleonic Wars. Central to the discussions was the principle of restoring legitimate monarchies and restructuring Europe to prevent the domination of any single power. This led to significant territorial adjustments. France was returned to its 1792 borders, while Prussia, Austria, and Russia made substantial gains to balance French influence. One of the most contentious issues was the fate of Poland, with Tsar Alexander I pushing for the creation of a Kingdom of Poland under Russian sovereignty, a proposal met with resistance from Austria and Prussia. The eventual compromise led to the establishment of a Russian-dominated Polish state, reflecting the complex give-and-take that characterized the Congress. The German states were reorganized into the German Confederation, a loose association under Austrian influence, designed to replace the defunct Holy Roman Empire and serve as a buffer against future French aggression. The restoration of the Bourbon monarchy in Spain and the Kingdom of the Netherlands creation, uniting the Dutch Republic with the Austrian Netherlands, were also significant outcomes of the Congress, reshaping the political landscape of Europe. The Congress of Vienna, concluding in June 1815, marked the dawn of a new era in European politics. By prioritizing the restoration of legitimate monarchies, redrawing borders to reflect a balance of power, and establishing a framework for international diplomacy, the Congress aimed to secure a lasting peace. The immediate aftermath saw Europe enter a period known as the Concert of Europe, where the major powers cooperated to maintain the status quo, resolving conflicts through diplomacy rather than war. This new order, however, was not without its challenges. The reshaping of territories and the restoration of conservative regimes sparked movements for national unification and liberal reforms, leading to the revolutions of 1848 and the eventual unification of Italy and Germany. Despite these upheavals, the Congress of Vienna's legacy endured, laying the groundwork for modern international relations and the concept of collective security. The Congress's most significant achievement was perhaps its contribution to a century of relative peace in Europe, punctuated by limited conflicts until the outbreak of World War I in 1914. This period allowed for unprecedented economic growth, cultural exchange, and the advancement of political and social reforms across the continent. In the aftermath of the Battle of Waterloo and his subsequent abdication in June 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte found himself a prisoner of the British, destined for a final exile far from the European continent he once dominated. In October 1815, after a brief period of uncertainty about his fate, Napoleon was transported aboard HMS Northumberland to St. Helena, a remote volcanic island in the South Atlantic Ocean. Selected by the British government for its isolation and inaccessibility, St. Helena was to be Napoleon's final residence, a stark contrast to the grandeur and turmoil of his previous life. The journey to St. Helena was marked by moments of introspection for Napoleon, who was accompanied by a small entourage of loyal followers. Despite the harsh reality of his situation, Napoleon retained a regal demeanor, engaging with officers and fellow passengers, discussing matters of history, science, and philosophy. Upon arriving at St. Helena in October 1815, Napoleon was confronted with the reality of his new life on this rugged, wind-swept island, far removed from the politics and battles that had defined his existence. Upon his arrival at St. Helena in October 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte was installed at Longwood House, a residence that would serve as his home for the remainder of his life. Longwood, chosen for its relative security and isolation on the island, offered modest accommodations that stood in stark contrast to the palaces Napoleon had inhabited in Europe. The house itself, prone to dampness and infested with rats, was far from the grandeur Napoleon had once enjoyed, yet he sought to make the best of his circumstances. Napoleon's group on St. Helena consisted of a few loyal followers who chose to share his exile, including Count Henri Gatien-Bertrand, Grand Marshal of the Palace, General Charles Tristan, Marquis de Montholon, and Count Charles de Las Cases, among others. These men, along with their families, formed the core of Napoleon's small court in exile, providing companionship and assisting in recording his thoughts and memories for posterity. Despite the physical constraints of his environment, Napoleon remained intellectually active, engaging in extensive reading and dictating his memoirs, which would later be published as the Mémoires de Sainte-Hélène. He took an interest in the natural beauty of the island, particularly its unique flora, and spent hours walking in the gardens of Longwood, accompanied by his thoughts and reflections on his past, his legacy, and the fate of Europe in his absence. In the solitude of St. Helena, Napoleon Bonaparte embarked on a comprehensive project to document his life, thoughts, and the principles that guided his rule. Surrounded by his loyal companions, he dictated a series of memoirs, essays, and reflections that would collectively serve to justify his actions and cement his legacy. These writings, covering everything from his military campaigns to the administrative reforms he implemented across Europe, were infused with his personal insights, and often reflected his attempt to control how history would remember him. Napoleon's interaction with visitors to the island, though infrequent, provided a window into his enduring charisma and the sharpness of his mind. Figures such as the British naval officer Basil Hall and the renowned naturalist Barry O'Meara, who served as his physician, left accounts of their meetings with Napoleon, depicting a man keen to engage on a wide array of subjects, from politics to science. Despite the restrictions of his exile, Napoleon's influence continued to resonate beyond the shores of St. Helena. His writings, smuggled out and published in Europe, sparked considerable interest and debate, contributing to the mythologization of his character that began even before his death. Through these efforts, Napoleon sought not only to vindicate his past, but also to remain a figure of relevance in the unfolding story of Europe. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte, at the age of 51, passed away in his exile on St. Helena, bringing to an end the life of one of history's most formidable and controversial leaders. The official cause of death was attributed to stomach cancer, a diagnosis supported by symptoms Napoleon exhibited in his final years and a family history of the disease. While alternative theories, such as arsenic poisoning, have intrigued historians due to high arsenic levels found in hair samples, these can be explained by the common use of arsenic in various products ranging from wallpaper to wine preservation methods at the time, which could account for its presence in his system. Despite the speculation, the symptoms of Napoleon's illness align more closely with gastric cancer than with chronic arsenic poisoning. An autopsy conducted by his personal physician, Francesco Antomarchi, and witnessed by British medical officers has not settled the debate, leaving the exact cause of his demise a topic of ongoing discussion. Napoleon's death closed a significant chapter in European history, leaving a legacy that continues to be analyzed and debated. Napoleon's death marked not only the end of an individual, but also the closing of a significant chapter in European history. Despite his exile and the controversies surrounding his rule, Napoleon's impact on the continent's political, legal, and social fabric was indelible, leaving a legacy that would influence the course of French and European affairs for decades to come. In 1840, nearly 2 decades after his death, Napoleon's remains were exhumed and returned to France, in accordance with his wish to rest on the banks of the Seine, among the French people he had loved so dearly. The repatriation of his remains was met with national mourning and celebration, as thousands lined the streets of Paris to witness the return of their emperor. Napoleon's final resting place, the Les Invalides, has since become a symbol of his enduring legacy, visited by millions who come to pay homage to a man who shaped an era. But the story doesn't end here. History is a rich, complex compilation of perspectives and interpretations, inviting each of us to explore, question, and contribute to the ongoing dialogue about our past. Share your thoughts, questions, and insights in the comments below. Which aspects of Napoleon's life and era do you find most intriguing? What lessons can we draw from his rise and fall? Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more explorations into history's most fascinating chapters, and help us uncover stories that challenge, enlighten, and inspire. Until then, see you in the next video.